She works with oral history archives, interviews, community memories, radio interviews, found sounds, and site-specific compositions to explore myriad identities in myriad locations. She explores these ideas of identity and power through a lens of intersectional feminism. Her focus is on disability, and she is currently studying for a PhD, looking at ways in which a disabled composer or performer can utilise technology as a tool for composing, improvising, and performing. Her work has been featured on BBC Radio 3's Lake Junction and has taken her across the world, from Edinburgh to Singapore, on a 10,000-mile train journey, to Canada to develop an improvising platform with disabled musicians, to China to explore the role of being in improvisation, to Croatia to perform with the female coding ensemble Offal. She is a Creative Entrepreneurs Fellow and a BBC Performing Arts Fellow. She holds an AHRC scholarship for her research. And her talk today is entitled The Cyborg, the Tryborg and the Crip Tech, Navigating the Use of Technology Interfacing with the Body. Thanks.
I had no idea she was going to read that out. Slightly awkward. Thanks so much for coming. Just a few things before I start. So the font that I'm using here is dyslexia font. It's not the prettiest thing in the world, but for people who have dyslexia, it's easier to read, so that's why I use it in my talks. And yellow on blue is apparently easier to read than black and white. So if you're thinking, what a font choice, that's why. And the other thing is that because of my disability, I get very tired in the afternoons. So I've just written this and I'm going to read it off script because my brain isn't really engaging right now. So I'm sorry if I'm just reading at you. I realise this is a meeting that could have been an email, but there we go. Thank you for coming anyway, and I think that's everything I have to say. Oh, it's being live streamed, so if anyone asks questions or anything, just be aware that there's other people in the ether who will hear what you say, and if you prefer to ask me a question off the live stream afterwards, that's totally fine as well. So just so you don't feel awkward about speaking to an invisible audience, should there be one. So my talk, Cyborgs, Tryborgs and Crip Tech, navigating the use of technology interfacing the body as a disabled person. As we look great start. As we look further towards the use of technology as assistive and additive to the body, we forget to ask the question, what's wrong with being human? Amongst discourse of the posthuman, we find modes of thinking which replicate enlightenment, racism, sexism and ableism. Hurtling towards the future whilst maintaining parochial mindsets of hierarchy and power dynamics, are we just doomed to repeat ourselves in an ever more dystopian comedy of errors? Disabled Studies currently hold some of the most exciting and radical philosophy on this subject. Disabledness places disabled people in the position of outsider, which gives us a unique position from which to be able to critique postmodern hyper-capitalist technological development. Disabled people's perspective, however, is viewed as existing in a silo, only relevant to other disabled people. What might happen if we considered this outsider viewpoint as a revealing perspective, dealing with the key question of what does it mean to be a human being whilst dependent on technology and humanity? This presentation explores how disabled people use technology to interface with the world and how this sites us in a discussion around the cyborg, the tryborg and the posthuman. It will draw on Foucault's discussions of the system of biopower, which includes the concept of a society of normalisation, in order to examine the stereotypes of disability and the categories of other which disability brings about in its readings. I also use Tremaine's feminist interpretations of Foucault to look at how biopower impacts upon the other. This work will then be extended into Donna Haraway's reading of Foucault, where she explores the identity of the cyborg in an increasingly digitised and data-driven society. I will also draw upon Petra Cooper's work, exploring the concept of performing a disability as an everyday context and the performance shifting depending on the contextual requirements. She argues that in this sense, the disabled person is always presenting themselves through a lens of preconceived ideas about disability. The act of taking on disability as a social phenomenon can be an activity, a role, a story that needs rehearsing, a story that isn't available transparently, but that needs mediation. The power of the normal and the performance of disability. My piece, Normalised Interfacing, consists of two different performance and composition aspects. Firstly, the performance of a wheelchair user making a sound walk, exploring the streets of a new city, encountering problems. I perform my disability to the people in the street. Secondly, I then use my experience of exploring this new environment to create a bespoke sound walk, a series of tracks which are location specific and available via an app or for a walking or wheeling audience. I wanted to explore how and why these performances become part of lived experience for disabled people. By using a wheelchair in a public space, I become a spectacle, a performance, something to be curious of. Indeed, being a wheelchair user in a space and being the artist is a spectacle in itself, one which disrupts notions of what an artist looks like and why a wheelchair user might be in a gallery space. I would argue that this interest in the disabled figure is a reflex to society's concept of the normal. In deciding what fits into society, i.e. people for whom the way things are designed, we also create a group of people for whom society does not fit, who are the other people. Foucault explores this idea of normal in his work on power and discipline. Foucault observes that the development of the industrialised society created a streamlining of society. Through standardised education, medical record keeping, hospital systems and the standardisation of industrial processes and products, we were able to test and record how people become part of a social process in which normal allows fluid passage, full contribution and productivity. In shaping the population to the normal, the systems and processes work more efficiently, and those who are out with those normal spaces present obstacles to this efficient system. A certain historically and culturally subjective regime of power has produced certain acts, practices, subjectivities, bodies, relations, and so on as a problem for the present. But what of those for whom this shaping proves impossible, for reasons for race, gender, disability, for those outside of normal, meaning that the systems which have been produced do not work for them? A system of fixes and interventions exist. Those who do not fit the mainstream may be considered to produce less, to consume more, and to be difficult to manage, or to create excess cost within an efficient system. Even beyond our assumptions of government and power, we have internalised the sense of normalisation and police it culturally. The obvious ways that society polices itself are through state power systems such as prohibitions and punishments, which are imbued with racial, gender and abled assumptions. However, as Shelley Tremaine explains, our society has complex and subtle ways of policing the normal and imposing it, including techniques of self-improvement and self-transformation, technologies of the self, such as weight loss programs, fitness regimes, assertiveness training, Botox injections, breast implants, psychotherapy and rehabilitation. If we can accept that the idea of normal is being constructed in order to enable the streamlining of society's structures, then we can also see that the other, in this case disabled, is also a socially constructed idea. Kuppers argues that dehumanising of the other masks the danger of disabled people disrupting a system which tells people they must conform. If this disabled person cannot conform and yet is experiencing a valid life, then the notion that one must be within the norm in order to receive society's benefits begins to crumble. As the word normal expects us to conform and also thus creates a space outside of it for whom conforming is not an option, ableism then steps in to reinforce the wrongness of not conforming. Ableism casts the role of evil, scrounger, lazy, ugly and demon upon disabled people as a threat to non-disabled people. Ableism says, do not be different for we will attack. Those who are not normal are not welcome here, for they upturn the system which maintains control. When we see a disabled person doing something out with the expected narrative, we are faced with a disconnect around our assumptions of people's roles in society, and the compromises we ourselves have made in the search to become a normal member of society. Disabled visibility threatens this conforming and shows a glimpse of potential for everyone to be individual and for everyone to reject normality. For every encounter with the other, every performance and citation of the order makes Foucault's biopower system momentarily visible and inserts the sliver of difference into the safe spaces of normality. In our current culture, we see that celebrations of disabled people's achievement are still framed as special, different and beyond. There is a space for the super disabled to be celebrated despite their otherness, overcoming their otherness, but still little space for non-superhero others to merely exist and be seen as equals. Disabled people of achievement are framed as superheroes, existing to motivate normal people. Those disabled people not able to achieve superhero status are then seen as objects to be pitied or quietly resented. This extension of ableism maintains the discriminatory system whilst applauding those who battle through it. It acknowledges the otherness which has been cast upon those individuals, and then, rather than remove the otherness and create a situation of equality and respect, tells those others that they have conquered the system which is stacked against them, hailing them as heroes. The flip side of this, then, is that it is implied that those who are not able to negotiate the system which is stacked against them are simply not trying hard enough. Normal gives us a choice to either applaud the successful disabled person or weep for and vilify the unsuccessful one. In fact, the option is there to remove the barriers that they were either overcoming or failing to overcome. Performance of the everyday in the city. As a disabled artist, recording, filming and travelling through a new city in a wheelchair, my movements become performance, inserting this sliver of difference into the city. My being in the gallery space becomes a performance of my disability, using the electric doors, negotiating lift space, entering staff-only zones to share the goods lift, or deciding amongst a group of women with pushchairs who should take priority in the public lifts, crossing roads with no drop curve, traversing tram lines in my wheelchair. All these actions provide an opportunity for me to be seen doing something differently to normal, and for me to provide an experience for the audience, which in this case is the passers-by who unwittingly become an audience. The disabled performances assist on their movement, their fleshiness in a specific space and time, their having been there. Here, performance is a marker of existence in a fleeting world. Kuppers goes beyond this idea of performing the disability as a conscious performance. She asserts that just the act of being disabled requires constant mediation and performance. For each environment, we present ourselves in a different way through different lenses and tell slightly different stories depending on our audience and depending on what needs to be said or done in that context. The act of taking on disability as a social phenomenon can be an activity, a role, a story that needs rehearsing, and a story that isn't available transparently but needs mediation. In this way, disabled lives require constant layering of truths, negotiations, representations of our bodies and lives dependent on our circumstances. For example, a disabled person may wish to minimise their difficulties for their employer whilst being required to relate their worst day at a disability needs assessment. We may choose not to disclose our pain or fear to our closest friends or relatives, but are required to look disabled when using a blue badge in public. As we reinvent ourselves in multitudes every day in order to meet society's expectations of us as a disabled person, we also delve into deep-seated archetypes around disabled people, deception, lying, faking, which we so often find in fairy tales and the media. Am I telling the truth? What is the truth? So I was interested to take the idea of performance of being disabled to the street, to see how the city responded to me and how I responded to the city. What would people see and what would I present? Interfacing and the cyborgs. The disabled body is cyborg, using sensors to make the body a performance partner. In creating normalised interfacing, I paired my bodies with a series of machines which would allow me to interface with the city and to create a record of that experience. The performance and the composition would not have been possible without the use of these machines. This technology, which paired with my body, allowed me a cyborgian approach to interfacing with the built environment. My technology included an EasyLight DX8 electric wheelchair, Zoom H6N sound recorder, 2 Rode M5 condenser microphones, 1 Bayer Dynamic SM58 microphone, 1 GoPro video recorder, 1 Sony digital SLR camera, 1 MacBook Pro 2010, oh the old days, Max MSP software, Logic software, Muse 1 EEG headband, multiple unbranded pulse sensors and 1 Arduino, just for any geeks in the room. Susan Broadhurst talks about extending the body through external devices and instruments to bring the body into the world in a new way. The body adapts and extends itself through external instruments. To have experience, to get used to an instrument, is to incorporate that instrument into the body. The experience of the corporeal system is not fixed or delimited, but extendable to the various tools and technologies which may not be embodied. Our bodies are always open to and entwined with the world. Instruments appropriated by embodied experience become part of that altered body experience in the world. In this way, our body is the general medium for having a world. This intertwining of the body, technology, and the world is important, since instead of abandoning the physical body and instrumentation and technology, extends it by altering and recreating its embodied experience. The disabled body as cyborg. Just gonna have some coffee. Talk amongst yourselves. In combining my body with the technology, Haraway's concept of the cyborg helpfully describes the development and disarming of the binary opposition to normal and the other. A cyborg is a cybernetic organism, a hybrid of machine and organism. Social reality is lived social relations, our most important political construction, a world-changing fiction. Haraway talks about how our social reality is actually a fiction. As referenced earlier in the chapter talk, disabled people are living this fiction on many levels. We are presented as a fictitious beast to society, either hero or villain, or at the very least an object of pity. We are rarely afforded a three-dimensional personality, and often the roles we are expected to play overlap and contradict each other. We are complicit in the fictionalization of ourselves, in that each environment with each connection will present an adapted reality, one which is appropriate for context and which affords us and other people involved the fewest problems. Haraway links to Foucault's theory of biopower as a way of shaping our society's systems to normality. In her writing, she describes the development of biopower as the beginning of cyborg politics. Michael Foucault's biopolitics is a premonition of cyborg politics. In Foucault's observations, we are streamlined to become part of the system, categorising normality using education, medicalisation, and how well we fit into an industrialised society, those who cannot fit within this bell curve of normal being sidelined to the other. This creation of the other then gives space to the fracturing of identities based in binary oppositions. These binary oppositions have an impact on how we view ourselves and the environment. We are living through a moment from industrial society to a polymorphous information system, transitions from the comfortable old hierarchical domains to the scary new networks. I have called it the informatics of dominion. Bit over the top, Haraway, but there you go. Haraway's notion of the cyborg explores a means of resistance which accords with network structures. No objects, spaces or bodies are sacred in themselves. Any component can be interfaced with any other if the proper standard, the proper code can be constructed for processing signals in a common language. One important route for reconstructing socialist feminist policies is through theory and practice addressed to the social relations of science and technology. The cyborg is a kind of disassembled and reassembled postmodern collective and personal self. Her description of the cyborg chimes with the approach of the disabled community to subvert the capitalisation of technology and use it as a means for community, opportunity, voice and personal freedom. By marrying the use of technology with a network structural approach, we can see ways to imagine realities which fit us. In addition to this, some of the most cyborgian humans alive are disabled people. Disabled people have for a long time used aids and technologies to adapt their bodies to an uncompromising space. However, Haraway only once refers to the possibility of disabled people being cyborgs. She says, perhaps paraplegics and other severely handicapped, sick people can, and sometimes do, have the most intense experience of complex hybridization with other devices. In Donna Reeves' discussion of Haraway, she identifies the importance of disabled people in the cyborg identity. Potential cyborg figures can be seen in the wheelchair user, the person with the cochlear implant, artificial leg or pacemaker, someone who uses an assistance dog. And she also draws the attention to the lack of discussion around disabled people in cyborg literature. Discussion of prosthetics and impaired bodies is often limited to consideration of how technology either restores functionality or normalises the person. This references the desire to cure disabled people discussed earlier, that technology should exist in order to help the person become more normal to society. Linking back to Tremaine and the technologies which are enabled to normalise us and allow us to fit into society, Reeve draws on Godley and explains, one of the reasons why there has been little utilisation of the transgressive cyborg figure within disability studies to date is because of a well-documented history of how technology was problematically associated with normalisation, rehabilitation and cure. Within popular cyborg culture, there seems to be an air of supremacy in becoming a cyborg, with acknowledgement and praise heaped upon those who choose to do it, be futuristic or artistic, as opposed to those who do it as a result of their disabled situation. In her New York Times article, The Dawn of the Tryborg, Gillian Weiss argues that only disabled people are true cyborgs. She uses the term Tryborg to discuss somebody who claims to be cyborg, but whose core existence is not dependent on the actual cyborgification of their body. Tryborgs can only imagine what it is like for us. The Tryborg is always distanced by metaphor, guesswork and desire. The Tryborg may be an early adopter of body technology or even of chip implants, but it's not their core identity to be fused with the technology, it is a choice. This choice echoes through much of diversity theory and can be seen in concepts such as cultural appropriation. If a white person puts on a Native American headdress as a costume, it is a choice. They may temporarily experience negative social consequences for their choice, but the removal of the costume restores their whiteness. This change in the level of privilege is something they choose to explore, not something which is a core part of their identity. So it is, Weiss argues, with Tryborgs. She critiques Haraway's work as that of a Tryborg. The manifesto reads, this is Weiss by the way, the manifesto reads, in short, we are cyborgs. The cyborg is our ontology, it gives us our politics. But Haraway is a Tryborg. She is not disabled, she has no interface, she uses the term as a metaphor. The strategic move where one group says, I shall speak for them because they do not exist, do not live here, and do not have thoughts, is common of the Tryborg when they are not speaking for us. Weiss also echoes the work of Mitchell and Snyder, highlighting that disabled cyborgs are often footnotes to the academic discussion of the cyborg. Tryborgs rely on, Tryborgs rely on the non-existence of actual cyborgs for their bread and butter. If cyborgs exist, how will the Tryborg remain relevant? Wouldn't we just ask the cyborg for her opinion? The opinions of cyborgs are conspicuously absent from expert panels, the tech leadership conferences and the advisory boards. The erasure is not news to us, we have been deleted for centuries. That was a Weiss quote. However, much of what Haraway suggests as a cyborgian approach to posthumanism does reflect a lived reality for disabled people, be it described by a non-disabled voice. Haraway's father was disabled and uses crutches to walk, so there is a possibility that her thinking was influenced this fact, although it is hardly mentioned, another common feature of deleting disabled people in cultural theory. Haraway talks of cyborgian fiction, in which gender-neutral or feminist cyborgs are fitted with technology to enable them to survive in non-human spaces. In Vonda McIntyre's Superliminal, the character Orca is genetically altered human who can dive to deep ocean conditions. Linnea is a pilot who receives implants to allow her to survive travel at the speed of light. These medical interventions allow access to spaces otherwise inaccessible, in the same way that my wheelchair allows me to access spaces which are otherwise impossible to navigate. There are spaces in which an able person can exist, which I simply cannot exist in. These places include multi-storey car parks, many office blocks, theatres, stadiums, large towns, cities, airports, public transport terminals. By adding my wheelchair to my body, these spaces become accessible to me in the same way as an oxygen tank allows a diver to go under the sea, or an astronaut uses a suit to travel and breathe to the moon. They have a rocket as well, but you know what I mean. The wheelchair is an object which allows my body into spaces which were not designed for it to operate. Despite our cultural aversion to disabled people and the fear surrounding the use of mobility aids and wheelchairs, we can see that disabled people are key to the development of the cyborg, to the future, the adapted human. We've been experiencing cyborgian lives well before our culture was even aware of the concept of virtual spaces and posthumanism. The way in which disabled people have celebrated their adaptations, adopted them and used them to create new networks of support can be seen in Haraway's identity of the cyborg. This is Haraway. From another standpoint, a cyborg world might be about lived social and bodily realities in which people are not afraid of their joint kinship with animals and machines, not afraid of permanently partial identities and contradictory standpoints. The disabled person bridges that gap between considered animal at one end of the scale to post-human part technology cyborgs at the other end of the scale. We encompass those post-binary identities of abled and disabled, animal, machine, human, post-human, celebrated and distrusted. We embody the cyborg in our interfacing with the everyday. Haraway states that cyborg is about the power to survive, not on the basis of original innocence, but on the basis of seizing the tools that mark the world, that mark them as other. Feminist cyborg stories have the task of recoding communication and intelligence to subvert command and control, and I would argue that this is precisely what disabled communities do through their uses of technology in their lived experience. And then I just have a wee bit of a track to play from one of my sound walks, and it's called Fully Integrated Machines.
So if we carry on to the left, there's a mobility shop selling stuff for helping people get around, and it just feels really weird because the advertising is all kind of older people, but clearly very fit and healthy older people, and they're smiling and wearing smart clothes, and I don't really identify with it, even though this is a shop that is probably designed for people like me or people who are older than me, but in a similar kind of physical situation. And I wonder why it's made like that, and I wonder if those images are really there for able-bodied people to say, it might not be so bad, you know. When you get older, you can still have some kind of quality of life. Because I don't really think those images are made for me. I live with my cyborgian wheels, and that's fine. I don't need reassuring in that way. It's quite strange marketing.
The bicycle helps you move from A to B. The wheelchair helps me move from A to B, and yet what are our reactions when we see these objects? Do we feel these objects that other people need, different people need? It's strange that we have much connection and baggage with these objects, which are just extensions of the human into mechanical, electronic form. And yet in other places we see, bicycles and, the latest earbuds and these super cool kind of cyborg objects with marketing to super cool and hyper-artificial. And disabled people have been cyborgs for a long time. We are fully integrated with our machines. Our machines become part of our experience. We are fully integrated with our machines.
That's it.
Do you have to take questions now?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. Does anyone have any questions for Amble?
Or comments, observations?
Comments,
Doesn't
observations.
have to be a question. Yeah.
Thank you, it was really interesting.
Thank you.
You've talked about putting yourself within a performance space, so to speak. Feel free to say no to answering this question because it is quite personal.
Okay.
But can you go through the psychological process of when you actually do the performance?
Yeah, that's weird. It's kind of like it's kind of just I'm getting on with what I'm doing, but I'm aware that I'm a performance, if that makes sense. So I don't perform anything specific, like I don't act out my disability, but I just do what I'm doing. But the fact that I'm like in a wheelchair going over gravel.
Does the surrounding like affect depending on like which situation you're in, sort of thing? So like if you're in a city versus like let's say multi-story car park, what's the?
Not really. It's more like I'm doing the things that I'm doing to make the sound work, and by doing that, I know that people are going to interact with me in a way that they wouldn't if I was just walking through that space. So like I've got one track that's called Kids and Dogs, and it's like because I'm at this height, I have a lot of interactions with kids who want to ask questions like, why is that lady in a buggy? And dogs who are also like at my height. So I have like a really different kind of path through the day than you would if you were standing and walking. So it's sort of not a performance that I prepare for, apart from like, I know when I go out I'm going to be subject to people's views, and people are going to maybe look or try not to look, or they're going to, like I'm going to integrate with kids, or I'm going to have to ask somebody for something. So it's sort of like putting on that expectation that there is going to be that element of me just getting down the street and doing what I'm trying to do. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Does anyone else have any further questions or comments?
Yeah.
Yeah, just wondering if you could talk a little bit more. I really enjoyed the sound walk at the end there. I'm just wondering, where's that been displayed? Like, has it been an installation? Forgive me if this is a slightly naive question.
No, it's fine. So this one is part of a sound walk. I think it's about 12 tracks, and it goes around Karlsruhe in Germany. And it was as part of the, oh my brain's gone blank. You know the big art museum in Karlsruhe, what's it called? The ZKM, Centre for Kunst and Media. And they commissioned 5 artists to do sound walks, and so mine was one of those. So it was at the Karlsruhe centre. You could like get it on your phone and then follow the walk if you were local. And now it's just it's on my website if people want to listen to it. Basically, you can just, there's like a tab that says sound walks, and it's on there, so you can listen to it like as a walk if you happen to be in Karlsruhe, or you can just listen to it at home. But there's a few on there. So, yeah.
Cool. Thanks.
But it's like, it's super important to me that I put everything online, because I know so many of my disabled friends exist online. And so like everything I do, I try and make sure that it's remote access, because it's like I can't sit here and ask for people to be aware of disability access in our disabled lives if I then don't make my talks available to everybody that I know is stuck at home as well. So like pretty much everything's on my website, so that anybody can access it anywhere in the world, and it's all free, so there's no like financial barrier to accessing what I do, yeah, it should all be pretty much. We had one thing I think with an orchestra, because their contract only allowed for a performance, and we couldn't do a buyout on the contract for having it online forever. But I do have a video of it, and if anyone specifically asks for it, I can give it to them, but I can't stream it and make it publicly available just because of the contract.
That's fascinating. Thanks.
With the sound walk, did you ever kind of consider incorporating, like, I'm not sure, maybe you didn't, I hadn't realised, but like a visual element to it as well, like, was that it? So, you know, sort of...
There's videos that go with this one, but I haven't put it up. So basically on all the slides, like these things are videos from the sound walk.
Okay.
I didn't tell you that because I forgot. But yeah, every one of these slides, the images are from that sound walk. And so I had a GoPro that was filming. So it's sort of, I don't know, maybe I've got some on here. Would you like to see some if I can open it? Okay, let me see what I can do. So basically I had a GoPro that filmed, and then I made a patch using Max MSP. Oh, hello. I'm glad that wasn't anything embarrassing. I had a patch using Max MSP, and it responded to data that was coming off the body sensors like pulse rate and EEG, and it blended the videos over each other. So it sort of makes a live blend of the videos of the area based on what my body data is doing. Let me see if I can, I might have put them on a hard drive, but I'll see if I've got anything here. That's all audio. There's the EEG max patch. ZKM videos. Anything in there? Oh, ZKM mashup. Okay, well that might do something. Nope. Oh, here's some movie mashups. There we go. So this is like video from inside the gallery and then the textures of the floor that my wheelchair's going over, and then this is like inside the lift and going along the balcony, and they're blending over each other with the data from my EEG sensor. As I get more stressed, one picture becomes more prominent, and then the calmer I get, you see the double videos at the same time. So there's like a series of these kind of mashup videos for each track. That's the roof of ZKM, the gallery. That's outside the parking area. I think there's a lorry doing something, some bicycles. So yeah, it's all like using my body data to blend the videos. But yeah, that's a good idea. I should put them with the tracks and stick it on my website. But I think very audio, so I just made the tracks. But there is video for this one. There isn't for all of them, but there is for this one. Yeah. So that's the adventures of the wheelchair. So it's like, I was just saying in the talk earlier, I think one of you was there, but so it's almost like, because my wheelchair makes lots of noises as it goes over things, like different tiles and textures and paving slabs make different clacking noises. I've actually got a kneed wheelchair, it's not as noisy, which is a bit annoying. But as it goes over little tiles, it goes clack, 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 and as you go over big tiles, it goes clack, clack, clack. And so it sort of becomes like my wheelchair is the instrument playing the street. So as I go around the streets, it's sort of like I'm the needle into the streets of the record. So I record that, and then that becomes like part of the tracks as well. Yeah. There you go. Mm-hmm. Anyone? Any other questions, Larry?
Hi, thank you.
Hi.
I was wondering if, in the context of the Tryborg, there's some research that shows that certain kinds of technology, online spaces, smartphones, wearable technology, is perniciously addictive, especially in certain age groups.
Yeah.
If you develop a dependency on technology, regardless of whether they're embodied or not, does that shift the debate about the Tryborg?
Yeah, it does. I think the stuff that I'm referring to is sort of older, so it's not taken that into account yet, but I think that is really interesting. And it's also like, I don't do any online gaming or like any game stuff, but I was talking to a friend of mine who writes video games, and he was like, but when I'm riding my horse in Red Dead Redemption 2, I am doing that. Just because my body isn't doing it doesn't mean my mind isn't doing it. So am I doing it or am I not doing it? And is that real or is that not real? And as a non-game player, I'm like, well, it's not real, it's just a game. But he's like, but if my mind's doing it, then it doesn't matter if it's doing it in tech space or in meat space. And I think this is like a similar question. It's like, just because like he doesn't need to do that to exist, but he still has a life which, like, his mental posthuman capacity exists in tech space as an identity in itself, which is separate from the meat space identity. And I haven't quite got to that because it's not really my field, but I've just sort of had that conversation with him this week, and it is really interesting that I think the more we go towards posthumanism, the more we will see, well, I mean, we all are dependent on it, because like imagine trying to do your banking without an iPhone or like a smartphone. Like, we actually are getting to the point where you can't live offline, you can't have a bank account, you can't file your taxes, so we are getting to that point in terms of like the administration of our lives. Maybe not like living and breathing and walking, but in terms of like administrating our lives within a structure, I think we are already there, where if you said, right, I'm going to step outside of technology and not engage with it at all, you'd really struggle to get a lot of things done.
So feels ironic given that Haraway was exploring the cyborg as a metaphor for other women, that you would be othered if you stepped away from that type of knowledge, you know. Seems to have almost come full circle in some strange way.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think this is the thing, like where I said at the beginning, are we just doomed to repeat ourselves in like ever decreasing dystopian circles? Because if we don't learn, then we just repeat it but worse. And I think that's kind of what's happened, like, and partially like again it's to do with accessibility, but I think a lot of the people who were writing about it around the time of Haraway were writing in a really inaccessible way. It was so dense that people kind of went, yeah, whatever, and then it didn't happen in the way that it could have happened, because basically, you know, capitalism and ease and society and structure and normalisation just is so deeply ingrained in us that to change that would be enormous, and that it's taken us so long to kind of get to the point of figuring out what Haraway was talking about, and we sort of missed the boat in terms of implementing it in a way, if you know what I mean. Yeah. I was just, I don't know what I just said then. But yeah, I think it's that thing about like the humanities of technology, is that we've spent like the last 30 or 40 years running technology based on people who didn't study humanities. So we figured out what we could do without figuring out what the impact of that would be, because the people who study humanities are studying it retrospectively. So it's kind of been pushed in a direction that, like, if people in the arts and humanities and philosophy had been able to look at it, they might have been able to work with the scientists in pushing it in a way that had beneficial kind of consequences for a lot of people, but it was driven by what we can do technologically as opposed to what happens if we do that. Yeah. But yeah, a lot of what I'm talking about is kind of like sort of missed that boat. Sorry.
Yeah, at the back.
Thank you. Thanks for talking and sharing your work as well. Just to pick up on the Cyborg, Tryborg thing, I was wondering how you felt about that binary opposition that's set up by us in that article, because it seems, well, I was wondering what you thought about it. Because building on what Larry was saying, you've now been discussing, although you can think of the ever-decreasing circle or a kind of dystopian reading where all this might be reading, I wonder if you can pick up on some words in your talk, insert a sliver of utopia, or maybe as Foucault's around, heterotopia, into what we're thinking about here, because I agree with Larry and you that there's a increasing extent to which everyone is posthuman. All our memories are extended or reliant on the internet. Yeah. Many kids nowadays, not just kids, I'm 50, so I have no excuses. There's other excuses for reasons for relying heavily on online materials to, that's the date, that's the name, that's the thing. Our lives are exceptionally mediated by the little rectangles in our hands and everywhere else. So if that's the case, I wonder if you see any potential, particularly for people making provocative art like yourself, to flip the narrative a bit, or maybe sort of people who write about the posthuman often talk about us being on the cusp of already in a period of what Foucault would call epistemic change, like a paradigm shift in human consciousness into the posthuman, at which point maybe some of the, I wonder what you think, whether the Tryborg-Cyborg distinction evaporates on all cyborgs now, or whether there's a dangerous flattening of experience of that.
I think ultimately everything's on a spectrum. So, you know, my neighbour up the road is 72 and doesn't have a smartphone and doesn't have the internet. And then, you know, other people are sucked in 24 hours a day doing everything. I think I had like 4 or 5 things that popped into my head when you were saying that. So, firstly, I completely understand like Weiss's response to the Cyborg-Tryborg situation, because I think there is so much erasure of disabled experience in the world, and she was writing at a time where like people were putting chips in them and like implanting extra eyes and stuff, and it was like, because white men were doing it, it was suddenly cool. and then you've got all these disabled people who are like, well, excuse me, like, I live this. So I can definitely feel her anger and her response there. And from a theoretical point of view, of course, everything's on a spectrum. But I feel like it's important for me to reassert that disabled position of going, but also we have lived experience of this, and you could have asked us about it. And so there's always that reminding people that there is this knowledge in the disabled community and in disabled lived experience. I think when you're talking about utopia, or not even utopian, but like a positive position, there are things for which, like we were talking earlier about how your personality and your body are completely different things. So sometimes the personality you have doesn't fit the disability that you have, and like you're constantly struggling between who you are as an identity and what your body is going to allow you in a corporeal world. So obviously having a lot of things online and being able to do things digitally solves quite a lot of that, because, you know, we have learned to work flexibly, we have learned to work from home, we have accepted that people can just put stuff on the internet, and that's the same as doing a performance in person. So a lot of that means that I can almost park my body in a corporeal world and go into and influence the world in a different way. Whereas if I had to do it through the medium of my body, it would be a lot slower and more painful, and I probably wouldn't have the same kind of impact. But because I can put everything online, I can touch people's lives that I couldn't touch otherwise, because I'd be stuck at home. So I think that's like the positive aspect of it. And there's like people like the Centre for Inclusive Design in Toronto. So they're doing a lot of stuff around like AI and retraining AI to be more diverse. Because like you saw the Twitter bot that just turned into a Nazi in about 24 hours. So it's like actually you need to be programming in a broad range of human experience in order for AI not to just replicate fascist bots. So they're doing a lot of work on that as well. I think AI is a massive issue just in terms of that, let's replicate what we see on the internet. That's going to be a very frightening kind of way of working. And it may then become more important to have a corporeal, physical reality, because AI just eats itself and eats everything you put into it. So it's like, you know, there's the question of like, why would I bother to read something that nobody's bothered to write? And if art is about communicating with other humans, which for me, I think it is, it's about, I put something out into the world and hopefully you get something from it. Some people will, some people won't, that's normal. But if AI is doing it, or if tech is doing it for itself, then what is it saying to us? And why aren't we talking to each other? Or are we just replicating something that stimulates our dopamine cortex that doesn't actually have like a human meaning conversation inside it? And does it matter whether it comes from a human or whether it comes from a machine if you get a meaning out of it? So there's all of that kind of complexity that we're getting into that sort of blows my mind a little bit. But I would say like one of like having things available online is like a massive kind of gear change for disabled people, because we no longer have to live in our bodies in the same way that we used to. Thank you. Are there any final? Did you have a question?
On the screen? Yeah, that's okay.
Yeah, of course it's okay.
Well, really cool talk, thank you so much. It was really interesting, particularly for me to kind of hear about the way that you were kind of thinking about navigating public space and the way that you kind of put that into the art that you were making. Do you kind of have any thoughts about how, I suppose as you were talking about that, I was thinking about the artwork as kind of an artistic process, and the way that that's typically used it can be, but it isn't inherently a political thing, but you've very much used it as a kind of, in a political way. Do you have any thoughts on like the artwork or the soundwork as a practice sort of, and your place in that context?
I think, like so the first thing that I came into like contact with when I was doing my masters was that we were going to record sounds. It was just like, let's go and get these lovely mics and record stuff. And And there was places I couldn't go just as a female, like before I used my wheelchair, and the guys were like, oh, we went up at midnight and recorded these trains in the tunnel, and I was like, I'm not bloody doing that, like, are you insane? So there's like, whenever you're doing something in public, you have the political spectrum of issues. You know, if you're a woman at night in the middle of an urban area, you're not going to make the same artwork as a man in that environment. If you're a black person, you know, in the countryside, you're going to have a very different experience to a white person in the countryside. And so I think that's where the soundwalk gets interesting, because it's not like, you know, we're all in a sterile room and we're all here because we know it's music. It's like you are in the public doing a thing, and there's no kind of rules really about what they're allowed to do to you, because you're doing something unexpected, and so you invite unexpected responses almost. You know, you sort of open that door a little bit because you're standing there with a big microphone. Like, you then become either a target to be robbed or a target to be talked to, or people start singing or just doing crazy things, you know. So you've created that situation of vulnerability, and depending on what your physical body looks like, that's going to have different impacts on you, and people are going to do different things to you or at you, depending on what you look like in that space. So yeah, it has that kind of desanitized social experience that you don't get if you're making music in a studio and you can just shut the door and ignore the world. Yeah. Fun times.
Any final questions or comments on Amble's talk? We've covered a lot of ground.
It was a lot, sorry.
Yeah, it was but it was amazing.
I'm quite short, but that means you can all go and have a cup of tea.
But I want to thank you, Amble. Thank you so much for coming all the way here.
Thanks for inviting me.
Absolutely. This was our first event as part of our NCM Disability Week that is happening from now until Friday, and tomorrow is a really great day. From 1 o'clock, Drake Music will be in the concourse showing off some bespoke designed accessible instruments for anyone to go up and play with and ask questions about. At 3 p.m, Maria Sappho is doing a workshop on AI and underrepresentation in AI in Studio 8. Sorry, I'm distracted. At 6:30 in here, there is a free RNCM student piano concert of old and new piano works. And at 7:30 in the concert hall, there is premieres of my new works for accessible musical instruments with some absolutely incredible disabled performers: Chris Halpin, Clarence Adu, Morena Latiba-Matt, and Steve Varden, who are all playing bespoke made instruments. And yeah, it's very, very exciting. But thank you so much, Amble, for kicking us off. And on Friday there is a opera scenes BSL interpretation and a song and sign if you want to learn some BSL. So thank you so much for coming, and hopefully I'll see you the rest of the week. She just has so much